we need to have a standardized of pharmaceutical reps.
The people that provide education, the doctors.
Who is the chairman and CEO.
The fascination the public has. The impact on society, the impact on unemployment.
The number one difference in my day-to-day, when I started 10 years ago until now, has been the use of AI and generative AI.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Unscripted Podcast here today. I'm really excited to have our guest, Dr. Michael Gertner, who has over 10 years of experience in the pharma ad agency side. Michael, who I've known for some time, is really an expert in the area of pharma ad agencies, organizations that support the pharmaceutical industry. He's a PhD by background, so we'll find out how he went from being a PhD to working in industry. And he has a background in biomedical sciences from Albert Einstein College of Medicine. He's currently the vice president over at BioLumina, which is an Omnicom company. Welcome to the podcast, Michael.
Thank you for having me, Will.
Yeah, absolutely. Pleasure to have you. Good to see you as always.
Likewise.
So a lot happening, right, in healthcare and pharmaceuticals, especially this year with the new administration. We saw an announcement that just went out by the FDA Commissioner, Marty McCary, about expedited drug approvals. So we'll definitely, talk about that. A lot of buzz in the news about what does that mean for pharmaceutical companies? What does it mean to patients? So before we start, though, Michael, a lot of people that are listening out there, they don't know what a pharma ad agency is. They might have heard of it, in passing, but explain to the folks, what is a pharma ad agency? What do they do? How do they work with pharma companies?
So a pharma ad agency really consists of a number of folks with varying degree of expertise, everything from marketing expertise to subject matter expertise to digital expertise and how to engage with thought leaders. And what we really do is we work as that critical support group that is servicing the pharma and biotech industry, really providing these end-to-end solutions across all of the needs of a pharma and biotech client, whether they have a drug that is still investigational, going through clinical trials, or whether they're gearing up for a launch and approval, or whether they have a drug that's been on the market for several years and they're looking to sort of drive greater adoption and engage with their customers, right, a little bit better than they've been doing.
Right.
And so I like to think that agencies are really that behind-the-scenes factor, that critical factor. We're operating to support the pharma companies. We might not be at the forefront. We might not be getting all the headlines, accepting all the awards, but we are doing a lot of the work to support folks on both the medical affairs as well as the commercial access side of pharma and biotech clients.
How does the work that you do differ for, let's say, the non-promotional side, let's say for medical affairs versus the commercial side?
Yeah, it really does differ quite a bit. And what a lot of people don't understand is we could be working on one therapy in a given disease area, let's say oncology, and only supporting the medical affairs side of things, and then working on a completely different therapeutic area, let's say asthma or COPD, and supporting the commercial side. But the best is when we oversee both, because we can sometimes act as purveyors across the medical affairs side and the commercial side. At the company, those two sides are often siloed, and they might not be talking to each other as much as we'd like, but that agency can really step in almost like as an arbitrator, a third party, but we can definitely step in and see where there are synergies, where there's alignment, where there's misalignment, and sometimes be able to engage with the medical affairs and the commercial side at the same time, making sure that the work that we're doing is aligned between the two groups.
So a pharma company can hire an agency, let's say an Omnicom, and the same team that works on medical can work on the commercial side?
Usually, almost in all cases, there will be different groups. There will be different groups, yeah. Right. It might be over the same agency, but due to, and you can imagine why, due to regulatory compliance concerns, right, due to the fact that the medical affairs side will often be activated, depending where the drug is in its life cycle, the medical affairs side will be activated a lot earlier than the commercial side. So there will be folks supporting the medical affairs side first, and then the commercial side will come a bit later when the drug is closer to launch.
Right. That's why I asked, because I figured that there was going to be some type of firewall, as I know usually there are. Obviously, I worked, obviously on the pharma manufacturer side, but I would imagine on the agency side there's something similar to that to maintain that integrity, right?
Yes, we have firewalls, numerous firewalls that maintain the integrity between medical affairs and commercial, as well as firewalls that maintain integrity between different products that will be within the same therapeutic class or therapeutic market, that exists as well. But at the same time, the firewalls exist for legal and regulatory reasons, so information isn't cross-shared. It doesn't stop on the agency side our minds from going from talking to each other at the agency to make sure that there's alignment when applicable and when necessary.
So I got to ask, you are a PhD by background, right? And a lot of people probably watching this are going to wonder, how do you go from being a PhD scientist, right, background in biomedical sciences, and now you work for a lot of these pharma ad agencies? Yeah. When you were doing your PhD, what were you kind of thinking, and how did you end up where you are today?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I know you were very much involved back when I was making that transition with some of your own work,
right?
That attracted advanced degree candidates like myself, whether they were PhDs or PharmDs or even MD background. So very, very grateful for that.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and so I think that the agency side of things, the agency world, is really a good first step. For a lot of folks can represent that critical entry point from an advanced degree program into the pharma and biotech world. It definitely attracts folks that are interested in the pharma and biotech business, but also have that creative flair a little bit. They're interested in communication, whether that's writing, putting together presentations or programs, right? And that's what I was doing a lot in my PhD. I found that I was doing a lot of grant writing for the head of my lab. I was doing a lot of articles for lay publications. I was affiliated with my institution, and I found I was doing a lot of that communication more than I was doing the bench science even. And so it almost made a career onto the pharma and marketing and ads agencies almost considered obvious. Yeah, by the time I eventually defended my PhD.
Yeah, it's an amazing transition. Congratulations on your success. You've been doing great. So I'm always happy to see that. I think for a lot of PhDs that are listening out there, or MDs or PharmDs, they're trying to figure out, how do I get into the industry? Actually, on my way here, I heard a crazy statistic, which is that on average, when there is a medical liaison opening or an opening within medical affairs, there are maybe 200 to 300 applicants for that one position. And oftentimes, obviously they're only going to hire one person for that role. It makes it super, super difficult to land the role. And a lot of times people want to know, well, what can I do to build my resume? What can I do to stand out? What can I do to distinguish myself? And so, I always tell people, we're especially now in an era where with AI, and I want to talk to you about AI, but with AI, with all the developments that we've seen in terms of the rapid rate of exchange of information scientifically, information now travels faster than it's ever been, ever has in human history, really. And so to stand out among all that noise, you really got to be able to build a brand for yourself. You kind of got to do that on LinkedIn, et cetera, build a niche for yourself. What would you tell people, the best way to do that?
I think one of the ways to do that is definitely to get your name out there by communicating your thoughts and opinions in a way that that sort of harnesses your expertise, at the same time allows you to like channel your passions into an area. For me, it was pharma and biotech. I definitely wanted to be involved in like cutting edge therapeutic innovation, and not just researching it in some wet lab where no one sees it, but actually working on these drug approvals and drug launches and putting out that information. And when you channel your passion into like the work that you do, your output will be tenfold better, right? So if it's just writing articles for, some lay publication that's affiliated with our institution, or writing an article for the New York Times, I think when you express your views in the area that you want to be in, it'll be recognized and it'll take off. I know on the ad side, more and more so, I've been told by my heads of engagement strategy and customer experience that video these days is the cost of entry. So you see that with pharma, right? But you also see that on an individual level,
Right.
which is what we're doing that today, right? And so some of the learnings that you see from the business world can also be applied to an individual sense in order to get your name out there, because the learnings are the same.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's get a little bit more in depth in the pharma ad stuff. So what do you think is something that maybe the average person doesn't understand that kind of goes behind the making of a pharma ad? We all see them on TV, the pharma commercials. What role, I guess, do the agencies play in developing those ads and all that type of thing? Talk to us a little bit about what goes into that, because it's a lot.
I think the number one thing that people don't understand that goes into the generation of an ad, and what even surprised me when I entered it, was the amount of insight generation and market research that's involved before an advertising campaign or any type of campaign creative gets disseminated, to the world. Right. So what you eventually see on a website or a brochure or even a commercial, right, if we're talking about DTC, that the everything from the images to the words being communicated to the animations that occur, what you see is the end product of about 6 to 10 alternative versions that have been thought out, well characterized, validated through multiple rounds of market research. And by market research, I'm talking about the customer base, which for the HCP side is doctors, and for the DTC side, which is patients. And so one of the main roles on the agency side is we're often spearheading that market research, where we go through multiple rounds of questions, validation, alternative versions, both in the messaging and the communication, as well as the graphics, right, and the visuals. And we sum that all up at the end of the day, and that drives our ultimate output. But it is a very painstaking process, and it takes months.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I was involved with it on the other side.
Right.
I worked on the pharma manufacturing side, and when I worked in medical affairs, I was often brought in to be able to make sure that the messaging, right, everything is accurate from a medical perspective, can be supported. And so I've been part of that, and you're absolutely right. There's a lot of detail that goes into it. But now there's a push in the U.S. to say no more DTC campaigns, direct-to-consumer campaigns. We don't want any, advertisements on TV by pharma companies anymore. Why do you think that is?
So for DTC, I think one of the reasons why there's a push, right, for the elimination or less DTC ads has to do with some cases that involve direct-to-consumer, direct-to-patient communication and advertising, where the information that has been communicated did not align, right, to the actual clinical and scientific data, the benefit that the therapy's clinical trial ultimately discovered. And so sometimes there has been cases where a therapy's secondary or tertiary benefits. So, for example, and from a clinical side, that might mean an endpoint that's either a secondary or exploratory endpoint in a clinical trial.
Right. But
yet that DTC form of communication is trying to highlight that benefit over all the other aspects of the clinical profile, be it safety or maybe it's efficacy, its primary endpoint. They're specifically honing in on what I'll call a secondary or tertiary benefit. For example, I work a lot in the oncology space now where quality of life, right? Patients' overall quality of life, if they have a heavily burdened cancer and they might have gone through a heavily burdened treatment regimen, and yet we want to determine what is a patient's overall quality of life if they have a fast, aggressive growing cancer and also they've been previously treated with a number of different therapies. And so quality of life takes into account a lot of things. It takes into account the fact that the impact of the cancer on them. It also takes into account the toxicity, right, of these therapies and how it impacts. And so in DTC advertising, there have been cases where certain companies have promoted this idea that the quality of life actually improves given a therapy when in fact it has not, or the quality of life improved, but it was mitigated by the product's toxicity and safety profile.
Right.
And so they're trying to talk about a secondary or tertiary endpoint such as quality of life without necessarily communicating all of the types of information that get you there. The efficacy of the product, the safety of the product, which need to be communicated. And due to regulatory and compliance reasons, you need to give the patients the full picture when talking about a product and not just skipping to the quality of life.
Well, you have to be fair balanced. You have to be fair balanced, right? See, from my perspective, I think why there's a push to stop these DTC campaigns is because ultimately they're worried that today's patients are going to go in to their doctor and say, I saw this commercial on TV. It treats X, Y, and Z. I want you to prescribe it for me. So I think there's a concern, number one, about that, right? Sometimes if you don't have a clinical background or scientific background and you see a commercial on TV, you could misunderstand or not fully comprehend what that drug's really intended for, okay? So I think that's definitely number one, is that they're concerned about, and I've heard this from physicians, if our patients come in and they specifically ask for that brand name drug, and it's like, wait, you don't really need that particular product. So that's, I think, a big issue. And I think the second one is related to what you said, which is oftentimes if these commercials aren't fair balanced, it could lead to the perception that the drug has no side effects, especially because the side effects are said very quickly at the end of the commercial. So you're not really paying attention to all that type of stuff. So I think, there's a concern just in general about what the impact is on patients when they see that information and how that. Now look, there's situations though where I think patient communication, patient education is very important because it can help to diagnose untreated disease. And I've seen that happen a lot. I knew somebody, a woman who she didn't know, but then when she saw a commercial on TV, she realized that she might have iron deficiency anemia. Okay, she had heavy, menstrual periods and things like that, and she didn't know. It was going on for years, right? She was having a difficult time, and then when she saw the commercial, it kind of clicked. Like, wait, I might have that, and it turns out she did. So I don't want to paint it that it's always bad and there's no benefit. There are some times where providing patient education is important, and I would say especially like in rare disease. Because in a rare diseases, a lot of times those patients are undiagnosed. I don't know if you saw there was a recent...
And unsupported.
And unsupported, exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think for those patients, they need some help to help them understand, like, this could be potentially something that you have and you're not even aware of it.
So another example of the benefits of DTC promotion and DTC education also occurs in the oncology space with a drug for metastatic breast cancer, where it was found through a number of patient inside advisory boards and committees that folks with metastatic breast cancer that were in this stage of first-line therapy were very, very comorbid with a number of mental health disorders, such as depression, anxiety, schizophrenia. And you don't necessarily think that, like, the pharma client is sponsoring promotion for the oncology product. They have no expertise, right, in the mental health space at all. Like, what can they do? But through DTC and direct-to-patient promotion, we could actually tap in to some compelling patient stories and patient narratives where they describe how they were able to, focus on some of their comorbidities with depression, how they were able to access mental health providers, how they were able to do other types of things like exercise and key, activities of daily living that were helping to support their patient journey. And we were able to deliver some of these support stories through the direct-to-patient medium, through the patient website. So sometimes it's those critical stories that you can't get anywhere else that can be handled through direct-to-patient.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's really important. Let's talk about AI a little bit. We're talking about, obviously, information and communication to patients. Nowadays, I'm sure you probably know this, but with AI, ChatGPT, right, or Gemini, or any of these other Claude, any of these other platforms, you can actually ask the platform, hey, I got, like the other day, I'll give you an example. So I have a little bit of eczema and psoriasis on my elbow. So I took a picture of it just to test and see. And I've had it since I was a teenager. And I took a picture of it and I uploaded it to ChatGPT and I said, what is this on my elbow? And it diagnosed it. Looked at the picture, said, this is what you have. This is the recommendations that I make in terms of how you treat it. They even said to me, do you want me to write up a little script that you could tell your doctor when you go to the doctor, what you think you might need and what support you'd need. So nowadays, AI really is making a huge impact in terms of how we obtain information. Googling has almost become archaic now, right? It's like we're all using AI. How is AI impacting, for example, what you do, and what other trends are you seeing in the pharma or pharma ad agency side that are impacting and changing the profession?
Yeah, without question, the number one difference in my day-to-day work from when I started 10 years ago until now has been the use of AI and generative AI, in particular, but we're seeing more and more other types of AI, right, come to the forefront. And I think on the agency side, we are working with a myriad of different pharma and biotech clients, all of which are going through their own trials and are at different stages, right, of their use of AI. And so in compliance with their guidelines and their adoption, the agency is often asked to either harness the resources that our clients have in-house, or in some cases act as sort of mentors and guide their own processes of how to best use AI for everything from evidence generation to the first drafts of the content and the materials that we produce. And because some of our smaller clients, I'm talking about like the clinical stage biotech companies, right, that are still trialing their own AI, come to us to the table. It is now, and they asked us basically, like, how can you use AI, right, to drive our efficiencies to meet our objectives? I think now what has emerged is it is now table stakes for agencies such as the one I work with, as well as all of them, to come to the table with our own AI platforms where we can have an enterprise AI system like enterprise ChatGPT that we can upload our clients' content into a safe, secure site that is not being distributed right to the greater public, and use our own enterprise AI system in order to do a range of different tasks to help us, create our marketing materials and communications and generate, clinical data at a speed that takes us much more faster than what we used to be able to do.
Yeah, I would imagine that, you could probably do a lot more with a lot less now, a lot less people. Do you worry about what AI is going to mean to the workforce in the pharma side or pharma? Because on the ad agency side, it's a lot of content generation, right? I mean, from what I know, right? So do you worry about that?
$1 million question right there, right? Because we're the third party support, right, already, and now AI can come to the table. I think in some of the things that we do, especially on the execution side, like generating comps for advertising campaigns, we've already seen some of the work that's being done in AI. Like I'm sure you saw the commercial produced by Google Veo. It's available. It's being spread all over LinkedIn, where they created a fake pharma commercial for $500. Right?
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah, using one of
just totally
Google's
with
videos, totally with AI.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right. And so when you think about it from an executional point, right? But from an executional point, that just might make the advertising side, like Medium, a new way for pharma and biotech clients to see our value, not just as an executional shop. Mm-hmm. So I'll rephrase what I mean. So the ad agency will typically, have our own in-house production facility, right, that will generate everything from doctor brochures to patient brochures to the videos to the digital specs that you see on websites. But we also come to the table with more expertise than that. They will come to view sort of the ad agencies as that more end-to-end strategic partner, where we aren't just going to be designing and executing like the actual materials that are then used to market the product, either delivered to doctors or through digital channels. They'll be viewing us, through the use of AI. We can harness those insights, that evidence generation a lot quicker and easier. So we can come to meetings and facilitate workshops that much easier. Or we can create wargaming exercises and initiatives in order to train a group of speakers or train a group of KOLs or train a group of MSLs that much easier. And so I think AI will sort of shift the direction and the value of ad agencies to one where we can sort of flex our scientific and medical expertise and our knowledge of the pharma and biotech industry a lot more than just spitting out forms of tactics and execution.
Getting the results, which is, because I think with AI, right, in ACMA, our organization, we have an AI platform. We have an AI platform for medical information. We have one for reimbursement. And to me with AI, it's not just the result that you get, whatever it spits back out to you. It's also the journey and the process that's really important in trying to get that answer. In other words, what I mean by that is if I hire an ad agency, right? If I have two ad agencies that I'm looking to hire and they both use generative AI for everything, nothing really distinguishes them.
Vanilla. Yeah.
It's vanilla, exactly.
Yeah.
Why I'm going to this ad agency because I want Michael Gertner, right? I want his creativity. I want his experience, his know-how. So I think AI is a good support, but I would be remiss if I didn't say that I think I am concerned that we're going to want these vanilla outputs, and I think that would not be a good thing. right? Those nuances and creativity, the originality that you get from a human being, I think that's really, really important.
So one of the ways that ad agencies and other types, even medical affairs support agencies, are making sure that our output isn't always vanilla, is more and more they're bringing in folks that are part of the cross-functional team that are from different backgrounds. So, for example, for me, that does have that PhD, highly scientific background. That's sort of my role, to engage with HCPs, talk about the high science. But I'm going to be placed on a team with maybe a customer engagement lead that might come from consumer packaged goods or another type of background, not even the healthcare background. And because of that, they're coming in from an industry that definitely has less regulation and compliance, but they're also coming with those creative ideas. And so we sometimes battle it out, right? Where they take the scientific expert like me that's well versed in the regulation and the compliance, but I go head to head with that strategist from the consumer packaged goods world, right?
Right.
And we just bounce ideas off each other. I might shoot him down, but he might shoot down my vanilla ideas. And the output of that, right, will hopefully land on something that is more than vanilla.
Yeah, that's
right?
unique. Yeah.
It's unique. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the FDA, as I said at the outset. So the FDA's Commissioner, Marty McCary, put out a statement about this National Priority Review Voucher Program to try to expedite drug approvals, which, on the face of it seems like it's a good thing, right? But one of the things that I'm wondering, and I'd like to hear your perspective on, is now this is going to shorten the timeline for that pre-launch phase, if you think about it, right? Before, as you know, a lot of MSL medical affairs teams, they're taking 12, 18 months before launch to go out and begin to kind of prep the market for the launch.
That's right.
But now that time's going to shrink, and that's the first thing I'd like to hear your perspective on. The second thing is around off-label and on-label. Because if you think about it, if we're going to put products in patients' hands and we don't fully have all the clinical data, what does that mean to off-label and on-label? Does that kind of blur the line between what's really off-label, what's really on-label? So I'm just curious to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, there's an analogy that I can make right now that happens a lot in the oncology and rare disease space, where drugs go through an accelerated approval process, where that priority review is normally at least truncated to 6 months. We're not talking about 1 to 2, which is what the latest guidance was from Dr. McCary. But it goes through an accelerated approval process, more importantly, which is based on what they call surrogate endpoints, the initial endpoints coming out of a clinical trial, knowing that the FDA is going to require longer-term follow-up and additional studies and additional data coming in. At the agency side, I've worked on a number of drug launches where that's been the case, and we are tasked, the ad agency is at the forefront of pre-clearing those materials, sending them down to the FDA as soon as they're generated, working with our pharma clients in getting that information reviewed by OPDP in time for the launch, because we know that the launch is being sped up.
And for those that don't know, OPDP is Office of Prescription Drug Promotion, so I just want to make sure people know what the acronym means, right?
So in this case, using that analogy, where I can tell you on the agency side, we're often tasked for developing these timelines. If a drug approval is rushed, where we can literally measure every step of the way, where every material is going, leading up to that green light, that FDA decision where, okay, the drug is now approved and you can go live. That being said, when accelerated approval happens, it does mitigate that type of pre-market education, right? That falls under the remit of the MSLs, right? Where they're educating doctors, as well as the commercial teams sometimes create these unbranded campaigns that sort of prime the market that can target a particular disease state, sort of setting up the unmet need that then the drug, when it's launched, can come and fulfill. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on prior to launch, like you said, that's very, very critical for a successful launch.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I don't think just because the FDA might allow a much more shortened timeline for like a review process and approval, pharma and biotech clients are going to have to think very, very critically about, just because the review time might be sped up, they're not necessarily going to want to launch right full scale, or they might want to adopt different launch strategies where they might launch very softly in one neck of the woods and then do a full launch later, because it is very important. All that pre-launch activity is very, very important.
Absolutely.
For having a successful launch,
Yeah.
and there's no way to get around that.
No,
I know you guys have data
and
on that.
As it is
Yeah.
now, even forget about the accelerated approvals. I'm sure you know this. Over half of the launches fail, as it is today. Right? I think for pharmaceutical companies, they struggle with making sure the drug launches successfully. So now you got a situation, and by the way, the number one predictor of drug launch success is medical affairs. So now you have a situation where this is truncated, this pre-launch phase. So I think it's going to put a greater, responsibility on medical affairs leaders to make sure that their MSLs, their medical affairs team, is much more skilled now. Because now you have to be even that much more effective if you want to make sure your drug launches successfully. Now, I have a question, though, just to kind of play devil's advocate. You said, we're going to base it on surrogate endpoints. But you and I both know, I mean, I've unfortunately been in situations where, this is public information, I worked at Merck, and when I worked at Merck, I was part of the Vioxx debacle. And Vioxx was obviously recalled. Later on, I was at AZI, although I wasn't there when the recall happened, but I was part of the Belviq issue there. I was the head of medical there for Belviq, and after I left, they had to recall the drug. So my question is, if you're a patient, you're listening to this podcast, you're like, wait a second, you're going to accelerate approvals, but we have a lot of examples where we don't know later until the clinical data actually comes out that the surrogate data doesn't always match or align with what the clinical outcomes show. Right. Is that a risk for patients?
I think it is. I think what the pharma and biotech clients have to do or have to understand is outline their future clinical strategy from the very beginning and communicate that in such a way so the patients understand, X, Y, and Z has been discovered now in terms of the data, but D, E, and F is going to be discovered at a later date. And this is the type of data that you currently have versus this is the type of data that you're going to be expecting. And there's really no incentive now or no one sort of requiring that for the pharmaceutical companies to do that if they're working on a drug with accelerated approval. The only incentive that they have is how it stacks up versus other competitors, right, or other drugs in the space that they're going up against that may or may not have that data. But right. I think the FDA is going to have to recognize that, and I think they can put out guidances and requirements that will allow, pharma and biotech in conjunction with the ad agencies that they support to create these new communication materials that clearly state what their clinical trial plan is going to be, and that often falls on the role of medical affairs. The medical affairs side, you show up, how many times you show up at a congress, and the medical affairs side of the booth has a list of current and future planned clinical trials that maybe some people gloss over because it's dense information. It might be a laundry list of different eligibility criteria and maybe a stack of trials, like dozens and dozens of them deep. But in reality, that communication can be much more streamlined in such a way so folks understand what those confirmatory trials need to be and what types of data they're going to need to get, because patients are going up to those booths too. Now patients are more empowered than ever not just doctors,
Absolutely.
To understand what type of data is missing, right, that's associated with that particular product.
Absolutely. Well, you have a lot of patient advocates that are even involved in helping to design clinical trials and what endpoints they're going to focus on, things like that.
Yeah.
Now, I know you have a story with Purdue, and I bring up Purdue because that's a good example, right, where, they knew ultimately that the opioids were addictive, but they promoted it in a way to say that it really wasn't, right? And they misled physicians. And as you may or may not know, I had a guest here a few weeks ago, a physician who himself got addicted to these opioid products, ended up actually becoming a drug dealer and selling it, went to prison. So I'll put the link to that video below here. But that was a crazy story, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because this is a physician, well-regarded, and then he ends up going to jail. Tell me, I guess, what your experience was with the whole Purdue issue and the opioid crisis, and what can we learn from it, I guess, as an industry?
I had the chance to work with Purdue Pharma on in a separate division on a separate type of drug. They were investigating a drug for sleep medicine for insomnia, while at the same time their pain therapeutics division, right, was involved in the opioid crisis. And because of that, the fallout from that was that the corporate restructuring of Purdue Pharma as the Department of Justice and legal system was sort of handling the case. We would see the fallout from that from a medical affairs perspective, how it impacted some of their other therapeutics that had nothing to do, right, with the opioid crisis, but yet were impacted by the reshuffling of corporate structure. We were working with the medical director, right, of this product. It had not been approved yet. It was still in phase 3 clinical trials for insomnia. And we were doing a lot of the evidence generation workshops, working with everyone from medical affairs, from their field MSL leads to HEOR, to their VP of market access, and with the clinical development team that was sort of getting the clinical data as it was, being generated.
Yeah.
And what happened was about 6 to 8 months into our work with them, the medical director came to us with a number of different logos, creative collateral, and names of the different subsidiaries that Purdue had been reshuffled into. So now they were being sort of cut up, and a number of different subsidiaries that were created to sort of offshore some of the issues with the pain therapeutics. So this subsidiary was sort of firewalled and had nothing to do, right, with the pain side. So they could focus on the sleep medicine side without having to worry about it. So he said, here's a logo for Imbrium Therapeutics, right, one of the subsidiaries.
Yeah, they didn't want to be flooded with the Purdue brand.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, through brand, and you need to now put, as the agency, we were responsible for taking all of the branding and all of, which was the logos and the names and the trademarks and everything and of the subsidiary, and putting that on all of the communications that we would continue to use, right, for this business.
Wow.
And it was all internal. It was still all internal. These are all internal evidence generation workshops. Nothing was being publicly disseminated yet.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me.
Right.
It doesn't surprise me, and I think, in the end of the day, I think what happened to them was they deserved that. In the end of the day, what happened to them, and obviously, ultimately, the truth always comes out. And it's a sad situation. I mean, I had just, like I said, one guest here, but there's hundreds of thousands of people that suffered from the impact of opioids and what it did to their families and themselves. A lot of deaths, obviously. So it's a terrible situation. Michael, it was great having you. I really enjoyed the discussion. Anything else you just want to share as a final thought, maybe to other PhDs that are looking to build their career in the industry, advice you'd have for them?
Yeah, I think working on the agency side has given me a lot of exposure to the pharma and biotech side, because we are exposed to quite possibly the broadest range of the types of work that you could ever be exposed to, more so than if you're exposed to on the medical affairs or commercial side, where you sometimes are siloed from one department to another. On the agency side, the expression is we wear multiple multicolored hats. And what that means is I can go from working on supporting a medical affairs director, creating proactive and reactive slide decks for a field MSL team. And I can go from a call working with that medical director to literally 3 minutes later supporting a commercial brand lead on a completely different therapeutic product, supporting their launch readiness strategies at launch. And so you get like the crash course, but you also get broad exposure to the many different divisions that represents the pharma and biotech industry. And it's quite unique in that regard, I think, that you can't really get anywhere else, where you get exposure to both a broad base of therapeutic expertise as well as a broad base of cross-functional expertise, given what different divisions within pharma and biotech, and also broad expertise to therapies at different stages of the life cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I always that was always something that fascinated me in the pharma side, is that you have to learn a lot of therapeutic areas in the agency side. You learn them quick, right? You've got to be able to go back and forth, and that's not easy.
We train, we have ways to do it. You train the trainer, so to speak. It's very interesting. We have different ways, different digital techniques and ability to rapidly speed up and upskill your therapeutic expertise and your knowledge, especially if you're diving into something new. And, as a medical and scientific director, I'm often tasked with delivering those internal learning modules so I can make the rest of my team smarter.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's quite cool.
Well, thanks again, Michael. Great to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys all, and we'll see you guys soon.